event at the Christian celebration of Easter, in imitation of the story of Jesus, is the actual crucifixion of a number of men. I would add that in many of the earlier cultures it would be correct to say that people saw themselves as part of a mind-body-spirit environment matrix, and to damage the physical world would be tantamount to damaging themselves. This attitude, too, was changed by Christianity, which didn't even take the physical world into consideration. The notion of viewing the body, mind and soul as separable, identifiable entities has permeated much of Western civilization. It seemed quite logical to our forebears to write of sex by only discussing the spiritual and emotional experience. What else of importance was there? It frequently rakes time for personal ethics to catch up with society. In Western civilization, perhaps the biggest societal change since the beginnings of Christianity occurred in the 18th century and was known as the Enlightenment. This movement emphasized the use of reason to scrutinize previously accepted doctrines and traditions. It brought about many humanitarian reforms. It also stretched the narrow link between what could be seen, the physical, and what could not be seen, the spiritual. Preface she. Unlike Christianity, the rationalists of the Enlightenment, in part as a response to the Christian worldview of the time, began to exalt the measurable physical and material over the unmeasurable soul. This attitude helped trigger the Industrial Revolution, laissez-faire free market economies, communism, socialism, and even the current trend of psychic debunkers, who have misappropriated the word skeptic to describe themselves. The materialistic revolution of the past 2 centuries has reached its logical end and now sees even the human body as nothing more than a machine. Even consciousness and emotions are described as mere chemical reactions. It has become quite logical to write books about sex that only talk about physical positions and techniques. But are people today any happier in their relationships than they were 150 years ago? Are they more sexually satisfied? I think the answer is no, although there may be differences in what people term happiness and sexual satisfaction. If the answer was yes, there would be no reason for more of these marriage manuals to appear. These books, these marriage manuals and sex therapy books, do not explain that body, mind, soul, and the bond that unites them form an unbreakable matrix which makes up the human experience. Thus, following their incomplete information will inevitably lead to feelings of unfulfillment and dissatisfaction which all the prayer or all of the orgasms in the world will not resolve. That is where sex magic comes in. Tapping the power. Sex magic is an ancient Western system which sees the physical and non-physical as an interweaving continuum. Further, the basic theories and techniques of sex magic recognize that all humans have innate powers of which most people remain unaware. A few decades ago it was thought that humans could not control their autonomic nervous system, ANS. The ANS is the aspect of our bodies that controls such things as pulse rate and pain awareness. Now, through the use of biofeedback devices and training, people modern sex magic have been able to consciously alter what scientists had believed was not consciously alterable. What other innate powers do we have that materialistic scientists either ignore or deny? This book is about those powers, including how to develop them and how to use them. If you are unfamiliar with magic in general and sex magic specifically, this book may be a starting point for an entirely new way of looking at the universe and your place in the world around you. Imagine being able to help yourself and others by obtaining the things you desire. Imagine being able to have sexual experiences that transcend anything the other books describe. Imagine being able to increase the intimacy and improve your relationships with those you love. It is possible, and the methods to achieve these things, usually kept secret, will be revealed here. And the funny thing is, improving your relationships and sex life are not even the major focus of this book. They are merely a wonderful, tangential bonus to learning about how to use your innate abilities to master yourself, your world, and your environment. So if this book is not specifically some sort of marriage manual, what is it? And what is this thing called, sex magic? This book's purpose? Well, first let me say that in at least one sense this is nor a New Age book. There will be no channeled information or secrets that go back in history to Atlantis or Mu. This is not because I disagree with many of the original concepts of the New Age which gained popularity back in the 1960s, but rather because the New Age has become part of the mainstream. Or perhaps it would be more correct to say that the mainstream of Western society has taken from the New Age war at once and spliced it onto its old Eon mentality, rendering much of war passes for New Age is nothing more than rehashed Christianity or a way to make more money. My previous work, Modern Magic, was a step-by-step instruction manual on what real magic is and how to do it. Have been. Preface she. Very fortunate in that it has been accepted by the magical community as a useful resource. The book you hold is not a continuation of Modern Magic. It is a step in a new direction, which is correct for some and not for others. It's not better, it's just different. Nor is it merely an expansion of one section of my previous book. The book you hold is complete in itself. To put it simply, it is the goal of this book to teach you how to take the incredible energies raised during sexual activity and make use of them for desired ends. Thus, sexual activity becomes not the goal, but merely part of the technique to achieve that goal. However, the energies raised are so powerful that if you have never practiced any form of magic, you will be surprised at the results. And if you have performed magic but not sex magic, you will be shocked to learn just how much more you can achieve. The above statement will upset some readers. Some magicians say that you don't need to work sex into magic and that sex and magic should be kept separate. If this is their opinion, I have no argument with them. But someone not experimenting with sex magic can have no idea how much stronger his or her magic could be. If they learn sex magic and experience it, they may be open to new levels of personal power and self-empowerment. Perhaps, after discovering the true depths of their power, they could then abandon sex magic and find their own magical abilities greatly enhanced. The performance and use of sex magic is not necessary for a person to become a magician, but sex magic can help enhance any magician in his or her magical work. This book's method. There are several other books on sex magic that range from elementary to absurd, good to bad. I have learned from most of them. One of the surprising things I have learned is that many sex magicians seem to be rather prudish in their writings. This may have been due to fear of obscenity laws. In the past, speaking of the penis as the wand and the vagina as the cup may have had its place, but civ modern sex magic. Not now, not as we move to the next millennium. Thus, I will be using words such as penis and vagina, breast and nipple, scrotum and vulva. If you find such words shocking or something you do not wish to read, then you might prefer to study some other books. Similarly, in this book you will learn about techniques and sexual methods not in flowery language, alchemical symbolism or prudish metaphors, or popular and evocative colloquialisms found in other sources. My goal is to be logical, complete, explicit, and scientific but not obscene. Masturbation is masturbation, not 8th degree work or self-abuse. Intercourse is intercourse, not at 9th degree right or doing it. No matter your level of experience, one of my goals in this book will be to lead any student from knowing little or nothing to knowing everything needed to become a practitioner of sex magic. For some reason, many people are scared of information about sex magic being made available in clear language to the masses. I find this attitude both elitist and anachronistic. There should be no fears, as those who are uninterested or unwilling to do the work will abandon sex magic quickly. Still, I have no doubt that the open discussion of sex magic without the symbolism and metaphor will be seen as controversial by those who wish to guard the secrets from the profane. It is too late for that though, as the genie is out of the bottle and cannot be forced to return to its tiny and uncomfortable home. Numerous books have already revealed the secrets. I am simply trying to make them clear and understandable to those who are interested. Although many link the form of Eastern paganism known as Tantra with sex magic, especially Tantra's sexual methods and teachings, I am going to try to keep Tantra, as much as is possible, out of this book. That is because Tantra is an entirely pagan system while sex magic is a collection of techniques. Do not, however, think that I have fallen victim to the mind-body-spirit rift. The physical techniques of sex magic cannot be separated from the mind and spirit. Indeed, the techniques are physical and Preface XV. Metaphysical simultaneously. Enhancing one improves the other. Ignoring any aspect is like leaving out a keystone when building an arch. It just doesn't work. Polarity. The nature of sex magic, whether one performs such magic alone or with partners of the same sex or the opposite sex, is that of working with polarities. These polarities can be seen most easily in the sexes, man and woman. However, the polarities exist to a greater or lesser degree within each of us. This is why sex magic can also be performed by oneself or with partners of the same sex. Merely because sex magic can be performed by any person, couple, or group does not mean that forms of sex magic can be performed by all people in all situations. Some forms of sex magic require a male-female couple. Other techniques, perhaps most of them, do not have such a requirement. When a male-female couple is required will be obvious, as the sex magic technique will require the united fluids that result from ritualized sexual intercourse on the part of the magicians. I ask that the reader, student, sex magician excuse any language which, for clarity of meaning, may not truly represent the fact that sex magic is for both genders. It is unfortunate English does not have gender-neutral forms, and trying to come up with such phrases is frequently neither linguistically graceful nor elegant. Personal responsibility. I would also like to address another topic, personal responsibility. First, to use the guise of sex magic simply to entice another person into a sexual encounter is not merely seduction by false pretenses. To me, sex magic is sacred and special. In my opinion, to abuse the idea of sex magic for seduction is nothing short of physical, emotional, and spiritual rape. Second, learning sex magic, indeed, learning magic of any kind, allows you to more easily make changes in your life. You, XVI modern sex magic, should realize then that you are responsible for those changes. Because of this understanding, a person who has learned sex magic is in some ways actually more responsible for his or her actions than are those who know less. This brings up the deadly scourge known as AIDS. I am very proud that Modern Magic was the first major occult book to openly discuss AIDS. As of this writing, over 320,000 people in the USA have died from AIDS-related diseases. I know several people who are HIV positive, and one of my best friends died as a result of an AIDS-related disease. Although the media present a seeming consensus of opinion over the means by which AIDS is transmitted, in fact there is currently a great deal of controversy over this. The accepted line is that it can be passed fairly easily through transmission of any bodily fluids. Just one oral, vaginal, or anal sexual experience can pass AIDS between partners unless a barrier such as a condom or a dental dam separates the couple. More and more researchers, however, are saying that on a practical, real-world level, the primary forms of transmission are only through blood transfusion, including being born to an HIV-positive mother and drug users sharing unsterilized needles, and anal sex, and then only if a person already has a weakened immune system. In a May 1, 1996 article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, it is claimed that while it is technically true that anyone can get AIDS, for most heterosexuals the risk of contracting AIDS from a single act of sex was smaller than the risk of ever getting hit by lightning. They claim that anybody can get AIDS philosophy comes as a result of power politics from both conservatives and liberals in the federal government. In fact, the story says the chances of getting AIDS through vaginal sexual intercourse are 1 out of 1,000 if your partner is HIV positive. For receptive anal sex with an infected partner, the chances of contracting AIDS are as low as 5 out of 1,000. And these figures are for unprotected sex. If people use condoms and dental dams, the preface XV infection transference rate goes even lower. A few years ago, many researchers were despondent, believing that AIDS would never be cured. Now, respected researchers are publishing papers predicting that a cure will be discovered within a few years. Which of these theories are correct? Is AIDS difficult or easy to get? I don't know, nor do I want to debate the question. I leave that for the researchers to resolve. The reason I bring it up here is that some forms of sex magic involve the exchange of sexual fluids. Nobody has to perform those sex magic techniques. However, any person who chooses to do so is responsible for his or her actions and for the results of those actions. If you have any disease which is even slightly suspected of being transmitted through sexual activity, you should inform your partner before engaging in any sexual activity. Not only would you be ignoring your responsibilities to your partner, but to my mind you would be committing a type of assault on someone who only wishes to participate in sex magic with you. Namaste. For those who are interested, some of the information in this book is being released through the auspices of an organization known as Namaste, the New Association of Magical, Sexual, and Tantric Explorers. Namaste is divided into 2 sections, Eastern and Western. Those who follow the Western section study and practice sex magic. Those who follow the Eastern section study and practice Tantra. A book on Tantra which includes information that has been held by members of the association will be published in the future. There are no dogmas or degrees in this association. Initiated members pay no dues or fees. Members are free to move from section to section and study what they will. Advancement in the association is by written and oral test, but no grades, degrees, or titles are awarded. Advancement only means that you have direct access to more information. However, no information is XV modern sex magic, withheld from those who have not passed tests. Rather, Namaste requires a person who has passed tests and received more information to share with those in the association who do not have such material. Further, a member must make sure that the person he or she has taught understands and can use the information. Thus, all members are both students and reachers. Although membership in the association is currently closed, you may request further information about Namaste. Send a letter to the author of this book in care of the publisher. Include a number 10, business-sized, self-addressed, postage-paid envelope with the letter. It will be forwarded to the president of the association. You will receive more information and your name will be kept on file for future membership consideration. Level 1, Student. The Secret History of Sex Magic. The bottom line about sex magic is simply this: sex magic works. With no more said than that, we could jump into an explanation of the theories and techniques of sex magic and emerge with much of value. Nevertheless, I have decided to briefly explore the history of sex magic in this chapter. In this way, practitioners of sex magic will have a background of how it has developed and spread over time throughout the Western world. I will also name some of the important personalities in the history of sex magic for your further research and investigation. In the bibliography, you will find a list of books by some of these people. Some readers will find this chapter highly controversial because it does not follow the accepted history of sex magic. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, the story begins with the Knights Templar. Founded in 1118 CE, it was the Templars' avowed purpose to guard the pilgrims going to the Middle East during the Second Crusade. The story of the Templars is quite fascinating, but for our purposes it is enough to say that they were suppressed in 1312 by religious and temporal authorities who were jealous of their power and riches. Several of the members were imprisoned or killed. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive. The Templars, like others charged with heresy, witchcraft, and the practice of magic, were accused of a litany of crimes. These accusations were probably just a ruse perpetuated by the 3-4 modern sex magic. Church and state to overbring the Templars' immense wealth and wide property holdings. The accepted history is that the Templars learned sex magic from the Sufis of the Middle East, who had learned it from the Tantrics of India. The medieval alchemists received this information from the Templars and coded it into some of their works. Eventually, Aleister Crowley, who learned about sex magic on his journeys to India and Africa, started experimenting with both traditional and his own newly created techniques. Meanwhile, a man named Pascal Beverly Randolph had either discovered the secrets of sex magic or invented some new techniques. Born in 1815, he was the child of a doctor and a saloon dancer. He became a cabin boy and learned the sailor's craft, eventually becoming a vessel master. Being a seaman allowed him to travel widely. When he was 25, he was initiated into the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. In 1868, after several trips to France, he founded the Euless Brotherhood, which ended up with quite a following. He published a book, recently republished under the tide of sexual magic, that postulated a type of spiritual bisexuality along with the idea that the orgasm was both magical and sacred. Randolph influenced the people who recreated the Knights Templar in the form of the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO. Crowley joined this order and eventually, after a divisive Bartle, became its head. Today, just as most teachings on ceremonial magic have been filtered through the lens of the members of the Golden Dawn, so, too, have most of the teachings on sex magic been filtered through the glass of Aleister Crowley and the OTO. The above history is accurate, but it only represents one current of sex magic. It is a skewed version of the history of Western sex magic, a tunnel vision that ignores the wider reality and fails in two areas. First, it fails to identify where and how sex magic originally developed. Second, it implies that sex magic has remained relatively unchanged over time, especially over the last century. The Secret History of Sex Magic 5. And simply carried into the present. In fact, there is ample evidence that sex magic has a much wider history than is commonly acknowledged. To understand this deeper history, however, we must first examine the nature of the Kabbalah. The real Kabbalah. Over the past few years, I have been lucky enough to have given lectures all over the USA, from Florida to San Francisco and from San Diego to New York. One of the things I now do near the beginning of every lecture, no matter the subject, is write the following letters on a chalkboard. TFYQA. The letters stand for the words, think for yourself. Question authority. I go on to explain that merely because I or any other authority or author writes or says something does not make it so. I always urge my students to listen to what I have to say, but then to check it out. I encourage people to trust themselves rather than believing a leader or teacher, even when that teacher is me. Many of you, no doubt, are familiar with the Kabbalah. It is the mystical underpinnings of Judaism, Christianity, and even, to an extent, Islam. Those of you familiar with the Kabbalah as used in occult groups know its theories about the tree of life with its correspondences as well as the numerological systems such as gematria. In my library one have well over 1,000 books that are either specifically related to the Kabbalah or are associated with it. Most of them are similar in content, simply expressing the same things in different ways. They all claim to explain the basics of what is the Kabbalah. And they're all wrong. The Hasidic legacy. For those of you who have been students of the Kabbalah, I would ask you to ponder these questions. Is it not possible that the Kabbalah is much more than gematria, Nodrican, Temora and the 6 mod SEXR mag and IC? Tree of Life and its correspondences? If so, then why would so little be known of other aspects of the Kabbalah? For the answer we have to look at a bit of history. In the 1700s, a group of Orthodox, pious Jews formed in Eastern Europe. The word for pious one in Hebrew is Hasid, pronounced Hasid. Thus, these people became known as the pious ones or the Hasidim, Hasidim. Previously, mystical Judaism had included many ways for developing power over one's environment, what we would today call magic. For the Hasidim wanted nothing of this. They looked for spiritual exaltation, not the ability to change the world. They wanted to increase the power of their prayers, not for power over the things around them. As a result, they focused on the mental aspects of the Kabbalah, including correspondences on the tree of life, meditation on how God created the world, and the manipulations of letters and numbers, a modern, for the time, mystical version of ancient forms of what is called letter magic. Since this information was mystical, it was inevitable that it would trickle into the local, German, occult world where it became part of that country's Freemasonic tradition. These teachings were later translated into Romance languages and eventually became, to many people, the core teachings of the Kabbalah. Even after this history, many people are going to doubt what I am saying about the Kabbalah. I would ask you, then, to look at the one published work that is accepted as perhaps the most important Kabbalistic text, the Zohar. It has litany on such numerology. Neither does the small but important early Kabbalistic book, the Sefer Yetzirah. To sum up, the version of the Kabbalah that is most widely accepted among occultists today is basically nothing more than part of the mystical teachings of the German Hasidim. This does not make such studies in any way bad or wrong or even incomplete. Rather, it simply indicates that such studies are only a look at one type or school of the Kabbalah, not the entire thing. The Secret History of Sex Magic 7. How I came to write this book. When I first began to study the Kabbalah, or rather, what is commonly known among Western occultists by that name, one was like a hungry dog in the shop of a kind-hearted butcher. I wanted to taste and experiment with everything. For those not familiar with gematria, its basic idea is simple. Each Hebrew letter is associated with a number. Add up the numbers of the letters in a word, and if they are equal to or have a relationship to the numbers of another word, then there is a relationship between the two words. In modern magic, one gave the famous example that showed how, in Hebrew, the enumeration of the word love was equal to the numerical value of the word one, and how, when their numerations are added together, the total is equal to the numerical value of a Hebrew word for God. It is a simple numerological system which, in this case, indicates that God is a unity and that God is love. Many a night I stayed up into the early hours of the following morning poring over calculations to try to prove something. I analyzed my chosen three-letter magical name in a paper that was several pages long. Similarly, I have seen people analyze sections of Aleister Crowley's works, rituals of the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, sections of the Bible, etc., for more pages than I care to remember. For one day I realized that something was missing. I was left with the gnawing question Peggy Lee asked in her song, "Is that all there is?" After years of Kabbalistic numerological manipulation, I came to the conclusion that, for me, at least, further exploration no longer proved anything of importance for me. I realized it had become a false road, like a fake psychic who seems to give you lots of information but actually says little. Sure, I could spend hours proving that words were related. This type of work is still done today. See, for example, the books of Kenneth Grant, and can be of great value to people who feel they need these kinds of proofs. For them, such work is important in 8. Modern sex magic valuable. I, too, needed it in the past and from it received personal insight and rewards. But for me, the teachings commonly considered to be the core of the Kabbalah now seemed nothing more than a form of mental masturbation. To the example of love plus oneness equals God, I said, so what? Isn't this already accepted by many, including myself? I already knew this. I did not need to prove it to myself or anyone else. I know that the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. I do not need to spend hours trying to prove that this event happened. I don't need to read hundreds of books to know that this event occurred in a certain year. To do such a study at this point in my life would be boring and a waste of time. One of the types of persons we meet on the occult path is the armchair magician, who will do some magic as soon as he finishes one more book or builds one more magical tool. He achieves nothing practical because he never does any magic. Yes, he does gain knowledge, which is certainly a worthy goal in itself. But knowledge alone is not the goal of a practicing magician. For all practical purposes, he is doing the same work as those of the 18th century Hasidic mystic. This was not enough for me. An armchair magician was not someone wanted to be. This was a major crisis. I was about to lose my interest in the Kabbalah completely, something that had transformed me and had been the major interest of my life for over 20 years. One hibernated, did tarot readings for myself, and brooded. Then one day, it became clear. Experience. That was what was missing from all of the numerological manipulations. I came to the realization that thinking about something was not enough for me. One needed action. And although many of the Kabbalistic techniques, using Kabbalistic numerology to make successful talismans, for example, provided a delayed gratification when the talisman achieved its goal, wanted something more immediate. I knew of only one technique that did provide the adventure, action, and experience I desired: Kabbalistic pathworking. The Secret History of Sex Magic 9. Due to many published works, the term pathworking has lost its original meaning. Today, pathworking means any sort of guided meditation wherein one takes a visualized mental or astral journey or trip of some kind. I use the expression Kabbalistic pathworking to represent the original meaning of the word pathworking, to journey on the Kabbalistic tree of life while on the astral plane. The key here is to be able to separate one's consciousness from the body and travel on the astral plane. In other words, this Kabbalistic technique requires you to achieve an altered state of consciousness. Except for the methods given in sources such as Regardix, the Golden Dawn, and the various versions of those instructions that have been published, little information has appeared from an ancient Kabbalistic point of view. If Kabbalistic pathworking required gaining access to the astral plane via an altered state of consciousness, it followed that there must be traditional Kabbalistic methods for achieving such a state. One such method I discovered in the works of Arya Kaplan. This was simply to place the head between the knees. This changes the flow of blood to the brain, resulting in an altered state. However, as investigated further, I discovered an earlier method for achieving an altered state, a technique Marcia Schuckert refers to as the sexual trance. This method is part of Kabbalistic theory, although it has been ignored by most researchers and practitioners as it was not a published part of the German Hasidic movement. And while this Kabbalistic key to the mysteries has been underground for over 2,500 years, it has leaked out or been rediscovered from time to time and formed the basis of Western sex magic, in all its forms, as it exists today. The history of Kabbalistic sex magic. If you read the Bible as a type of history, you will see that the prophets of every generation railed on the Hebrews not to worship the gods and goddesses of other cultures. The implication of this is that the Hebrews were not monotheistic from the time of Abraham. 10 mod zxr mag anik bur were as polytheistic as their neighboring cultures. Indeed, in the Hebrew goddess, respected anthropologist Raphael Paddai shows that the Hebrews worshipped a goddess both in their homes and at the sacred temple in Jerusalem up until the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. In the magazine Biblical Archaeology Review, which I highly recommend, you will frequently find articles aboard the religious practices of the early Hebrews, practices which included the worship of both a god and a goddess. In most Jewish temples Rodeh, the place where the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible in the form of scrolls, resides is located on a raised platform. This platform is usually in the form of a type of stage where the rabbi, the leader of the prayers, and the cantor, the leader of the chants and songs, also have their ritual positions. This area is known as the bima, pronounced bima. The word bima means a platform or stage. However, the source of the word is bama, which refers to the idea of a high place. In the Middle East, a raised area was commonly where various deities, not just the Jewish God, were worshipped. Other holdovers from earlier, pagan times, including the worship of the moon as a form of the lunar goddess Lavanna, which is now the very name of the moon in Hebrew, are also found in various Jewish folk traditions. See Rake's Pagan Rites in Judaism for some other examples. This is not a book on the history of paganism, but a few things need to be mentioned. Early forms of paganism had several purposes, perhaps the most important one being fertility. Early pagans practiced rites to ensure the fertility of crops, herds, and people. Frequently, these rites included sexual behavior. For example, in some cultures, pagans would have ritualized intercourse on top of freshly planted crops. It was believed that the energy raised during their rite would, through imitation of their elementary sex magic, help the crops grow. Is there any evidence that the early Hebrews, like their polytheistic neighbors, had sexual rites and mysteries? The answer is yes. In fact, some of those rites even have modern versions. The Secret History of Sex Magic 11. One example is the practice of circumcision. Before this practice was fixed in Judaism to 8 days after a boy was born, it was probably part of puberty rites. In other words, it was performed when a boy reached the age of majority as a sign of sexual maturity. Puberty rites for both boys and girls are common in pagan cultures. In some cultures, pubertal male circumcision rites are still practiced as part of male mysteries. In Judaism, boys still have a type of such a rite, albeit with or the circumcision, when they go through the ritual entry into adulthood known as the bar mitzvah. More recently, girls have been added to this tradition when they go through a similar bat mitzvah. In the Torah, circumcision is a sign of a pact between God and the Jews. In this, the link between sexuality and spirituality is hinted at. At other times you will read about situations where placing the hand on the thigh is a sign of an agreement, usually between a human and the divine. Thigh is a euphemism for penis, much as the Bible uses the verb no to mean intercourse. This idea was either adopted or borrowed from other cultures where a man would swear an oath by placing his hand over his testicles. In fact, our word testify, derived, of course, from the word testes, comes from this practice. There is more evidence of sexual rites in ancient Judaism. Raphael Partai's book The Hebrew Goddess clearly shows that there was not only a strong sexual component to the earliest Jewish mysticism, but that it was very important. Since the making of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, many people have become familiar with the shape of the Ark of the Covenant. On TP of it were 2 cherubim. According to Pattai, there is a Talmudic tradition that as long as Israel fulfilled the will of God, the faces of the cherubim were turned toward each other. However, when Israel sinned, they turned their faces away from each other. What could this mean? The Ark of the Covenant was kept in the Holy of Holies, the most private and sacred part of the temple in Jerusalem. The 12 modern sex magic famous early historian of the Jews, Flavius Josephus, 37 CE, approximately 100 CE, wrote that there was nothing in the Holy of Holies. Why? It is well accepted that he wanted to represent Judaism as anti-conic, a religion free from the worship of idols or icons. But was there something more? Something of which Josephus might even have been embarrassed to mention? The answer comes from an even Carlier historian, Philo, 30 BCE-45 CE. He wrote that in the most inner part of the temple, in the most sacred part of the most sacred Jewish site, there were the statues of the cherubim. And these cherubim were entwined like a husband and wife. That is, they were shown having intercourse. This was verified later by the report of a Talmudist known as Rabbi Kedina, who claimed that on holy days, when people had gone on a pilgrimage to come to the temple, the priests would actually show the cherubim to them and say, "Behold, your love before God is like the love of male and female." Several hundred years later, the famous Rashi wrote the cherubim were joined together and were clinging to and embracing each other like a male who embraces a female. In other words, the ultimate secret of the Holy of Holies was not that it held the Ark of the Covenant, the Torah, or the tablets of the 10 Commandments. Rather, it was the spiritual nature of sex. The previously mentioned Talmudic tradition would imply that the cherubim would be engaged in constant sexual intercourse as long as Israel fulfilled the will of God, but they would separate from their embrace if Israel sinned. Further, God was believed to speak from between the cherubim. Remember, according to the Torah and the Kabbalah, God creates through speech, and the Lord said, "Let there be light." And lo, there was light. This, then, is the revelation of the Kabbalistic secret of sex magic, prophecy, divination, and invocation, at least can result from spiritualized sex. Techniques for this will be explained in later chapters. From Talmudic sources, we also know that one of the biggest holidays for the ancient Jews came about 2 weeks after the secret history of sex magic 13. Hebrew New Year. Pilgrims would come to the temple in Jerusalem from all over for this holiday, which was considered a joyous feast. However, at the end of the 7 days of this festival, which was celebrated by both men and women, the festivities would become so intense that the men and women would mingle and commit acts which were euphemistically called lightheadedness. In modern terms, the crowd ran sexually rampant. This behavior was ended between about 100 BCE and 70 CE. Another source which indicates that early Judaism had sexual rites is found in Carlos Suarez's book The Song of Songs, which is his interpretation of that short biblical text, known also by its mistranslated side, the Song of Solomon. In the introduction, Suarez describes briefly the honored Rabbi Akiva, also known as Akiba, who was born in 40 CE and was executed in the year 135 CE after spending many years in prison for being a supporter of the Jewish war against Rome. Today, Rabbi Akiva is honored by Jews all over the world. Poems and prayers attributed to him are recited by faithful Jews. I still remember the beautiful, lilting chanted prayer that begins, Amar Rabbi Akiva. Thus spake Rabbi Akiva. He is considered the father of the written version of the Jewish oral laws known as the Mishnah Torah. He is also considered by many to be the father of the Kabbalah. Just as major Christian sects have divisions among themselves, 50 TOOO, have there been divisions in Judaism. In the 1st century CE, Rabbi Ishmael took a position similar to that of some modern-day fundamentalist Christians. He and his supporters held that the Jewish holy writings were written in a language that spoke directly to men and should be accepted literally. Rabbi Akiva disagreed and held that the words were only the form of the message. The real meaning of the Torah was to be found in its mystical interpretation, its inner essence. Thus, when a discussion of which books should be considered part of the Jewish Bible was taking place among the leading 14 modern sex magic rabbis, a majority of them wanted to exclude the seemingly profane love poem that is the Song of Songs. After all, how could a song with phrases such as "kiss me with the kisses of your mouth" and "your two breasts are like two fawns" be part of a holy book? Rabbi Akiva was one of the most honored rabbis of his time and remains so to the present day. In his time, he was held in great respect and was considered a powerful authority on Judaism. Akiva wielded his reputation and authority to change the attitude of the other rabbis. The whole universe is not worth the day our book was given to Israel, he said, because all the scriptures are holy, but the Song of Songs is the most holy. When I first read this quote, I was both fascinated and puzzled. Isn't it odd that one of the most important rabbis in Jewish history defended the love song not merely as a nice book, not, as some would say, because it is God telling how he loves Israel, or vice versa, but because it is the most holy of all the scriptures? Remember, Akiva is considered to be the father of the Kabbalah. Could not the reason for Akiva's defense of the book be that it retained the sacred secret of Judaism, the secret of sex magic? This secret would have then been passed down to his followers and from there to many of the schools of Kabbalah. Even the rather stodgy and pedantic weight in the Holy Kabbalah refers 1.0 the fact that mystical Jews found marriage to be a sacrament and that they practiced a teaching in unfrequented paths, something handed down from the past, of which there is some vestige of teaching in the East. This appears in the section of White's book titled The Mystery of Sex, and indicates that among Kabbalists there was a sex magic teaching which was in some ways similar to the sexual teachings of the Taoists and Tantrics. In a footnote he says that the Kabbalistic sex magicians had an inward, spiritual and godly ideal, on which they dweller, and by which they seem to have accomplished transmutations below. That is, their sex magic, which was both a physical and spiritual act, produced changes, magic, in the physical plane. The Secret History of Sex Magic 15. As a final note to this section, I would add that among devout Jews today it is a mitzvah, a word that means both a commandment from God and a blessing, to have sex with your spouse on the Sabbath. This is because God is considered to be a divine androgyne, and by having sex, uniting male and female, they are simulating God. An alternate interpretation is that they are imitating God in union with his consort, the Shekinah, similar to the Western pagan notion of the god united with the goddess, or the Hindu notion of Shiva united with Shakti. The dissemination of the Kabbalah after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 CE, the Jews were dispersed throughout Asia and Europe. Many Jews considered this a punishment by God upon them for not following the traditions of Judaism. Specifically, they were not following the many Jewish laws and they were worshipping other gods and goddesses. But the Kabbalists claimed that by dispersing the Jews, the wisdom of the Kabbalah was spread throughout the world. From this standpoint, the diaspora was not a curse on the Jews but a blessing on the rest of the world. And that blessing, the Kabbalah, consisted, at least in part, of the secrets of sex magic. As the Jews moved through Europe, they formed small communities. And some of them were schools of Kabbalists. The separation between the communities added diversity, and many of the Kabbalistic teachings, including those concerning sex magic, must have changed and evolved. But how did the teachings get beyond the schools of mystical Judaism? The answer, I believe, comes from the very nature of Judaism and its long tradition of Jews being the people of the book. As the Catholic Church grew stronger, the secular education, including reading, writing, and mathematics, of the faithful was frowned on and was limited to the royalty, the wealthy, scribes of the church, and certain members of the military. But because many Jews could read, write, and knew mathematics, they often 16 modern sex magic acted as traveling messengers or as tax collectors for the wealthy. With some of them came the Kabbalah and sex magic. They communicated with others who would travel, including the wandering musicians known by such names as troubadours, trouvers, and the later Minnesingers and Meistersingers who roamed parts of Western Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries CE. Although it was usually men who were the wandering bards, as recorded by male historians who, for centuries, downplayed the importance of women in history, some women also did this. For example, a female troubadour was known as a troubaretz. In the 13th century, a little-known book called Efgar ha-Kadesh, the Holy Letter, was spread among Jews in Spain. It was for many years attributed to the famous rabbi named Nachmanides, but scholars today agree that the rabbi was probably not the author. The book was so popular that 3 varying manuscripts of this book are known. It has been said that all truly holy books can be read on 3 levels: physical, spiritual, and mystical. On the physical level, this book appears to be a Jewish marriage manual. On a spiritual level, this book is seen as a Kabbalistic work depicting God's relationship to the Jews. But on a mystical level, it reveals virtually all of the mysteries and techniques of sex magic that are in use today. It is my opinion that the wandering medieval minstrels had some familiarity with this book or with those who used its techniques and helped RO disseminate the knowledge. Up to this time, weddings were not well known. People would live together and call themselves husband and wife. They were considered married even without a wedding ritual. In the British Isles, rules to protect women became part of what was known as the common, primarily unwritten, law. Thus, after a certain period of time of living together and claiming to be husband and wife, and accepted as such by the community, a woman would be legally recognized as a man's common law wife. From that point on, he couldn't simply dump her on the street when he was tired of. The Secret History of Sex Magic 17. She had rights under the laws of divorce although they had not gone through a formal wedding ceremony. Common law is one of the bases for the American legal system. Generally, in Western, Christian-controlled society, it was only the rich and the royal who had weddings. The purpose of this public display was to show everyone that only the children of this woman would be the legitimate heirs of a particular man. In Faciar, marriage was more a legal contract than a desire to come together out of love. Sometimes paintings were made to show the wedding scene in order to prove that a wedding had been held. Rulers and wealthy men wanted to know that their offspring, in fact, were their children by blood. It was believed that blood had innate magical qualities. There is even a belief today among some Britons in the king's touch, that the very touch of a king, who was also approved of by the Christian God, or else how could he be king, could cure various sicknesses. To ensure a continued bloodline, monogamy became the rule for the wives of the wealthy and for royals. Even so, there is ample evidence that both wives and husbands often had sex outside of marriage. Eventually, the idea of love became a fixture of marriage. It was an outgrowth of the notion of courtly love, which was spread by the traveling bards. They even had rules for courtly love, some of which hid the secrets of sex magic. For example, Rule 30, according to Andreas Capellanus some 1,500 years ago, reads, "A true lover is continually and without interruption obsessed by the image of his beloved." Within these words is a secret of sex magic which some say was discovered by a spare in this century. As can be seen, this aspect of sex magic predated spare by more than a millennium. Another group of travelers were the tradespeople, artisans capable of many valuable skills. They came from the earliest of times, when each craft was also associated with a deity, and continued into the Renaissance. In ancient Rome, such guilds were known as collegia, the source of our word college. They had their own 18 modern sex magic buildings where they would share the secrets of their guild. Members would hold feasts known as agape, probably the source of the first century Christian agape feasts. To identify each other at large or within the confines of their guild houses, they had special hand signs, gestures, and touches, including special, ritualistic kisses. In this way, they were the links between the ancient mystery schools and modern occult lodges. In fact, the collegia were influenced by the Greeks, who, in turn, had been influenced by a variety of Middle Eastern cultures, including the teachings of the Egyptians, the Syrians, and the ancient Hebrews. Since they were already keeping secrets and were dedicated to spiritual systems, it is possible that they received information on sex magic from the Hebrews. After the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West, the guilds remained in parts of Italy, France, and the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Byzantium or Constantinople. Guild members, because they had skills that were needed, were able to travel and find work. Perhaps the best known of the guild members were the people who constructed buildings, the masons. Since they did not owe allegiance to any particular king or local ruler, they were frec, rather than vassals or serfs. They became known as operative Freemasons. Over the centuries, other people became free within the dissolving feudal culture even if they were not masons in the sense of a worker with masonry. These people were the source of speculative Freemasonry. These people would talk with others who wandered, including the bards and some of the Jews. Inevitably, they learned the secrets of the Kabbalah and Kabbalistic sex magic. Although some of the teachings were probably made known in the higher degrees of the Freemasons, a real turning point came due to two things. The first was the common availability of printed material. Hand copying books and other manuscripts had always been a difficult and time-consuming process. Then Johannes Gutenberg developed movable type, and in 1455 produced his first book by The Secret History of Sex Magic 19. This new method, a Bible. Initially, the Catholic Church opposed the printing press as a tool of the devil, but eventually the technology allowed information to be distributed more easily than ever before. The second factor was the influence of two extraordinary men. Swedenborg. The first of these important men was Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688–1772. He was raised in Sweden and moved to London in 1744. While still in Sweden, he had the first of his many experiences of visions, which some say led to the creation of the religion of spiritualism a century later, and automatic writing. During this time he was in frequent contact with, and seemed to be preoccupied by, a group of Jews. Automeric writing takes place when a person allows another entity, personality to manifest within himself or herself and take over the physical body for the purpose of making communication easier. The process usually requires some sort of trance. Swedenborg was able to accomplish this through breath control. He would slow down his breathing, which, at the same time, would slow down his heart rate. Eventually, he would reach a state of ecstatic trance, resulting in page after page of automatic writing. Swedenborg's writing had some very sexual overtones. In Degenerations he analyzed both the physical and psychological pleasures of love. Then, like many other mystics, see, for example, the visions of St. Teresa of Avila, who founded the Carmelite order in 1562, he interpreted his own sexual dreams to imply that they were religious experiences. In his later days in London, Swedenborg was probably in contact with Rabbi Samuel Jacob Chaim Fock, c. 1710–1782. Fock was considered to be a Kabbalistic miracle worker. One book even described him as the Baal Shem of London. A Baal Shem, or sayer of the name, used Kabbalistic methods to work magic. The most famous one was called Great Tov and was thus known as the Baal Shem Tov or Besht for short. Prayers he wrote are still 20 modern sex magic, recited at synagogues around the world. Most Jews today believe he was given the appellation Tov, which also means good, because of his kindness and good works. I mention this because in the history lection given to members of the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, he was considered the head of the order before its modern incarnation in 1888. Although Swedenborg later denied it, his diary shows that he was deeply involved with Kabbalistic methods at this time. Curiously, his personal writings took on anti-Semitic rantings, although his automatic writings never expressed such ideas. While in London, Swedenborg was also fascinated by a group of Moravians, a Protestant Christian sect founded in 1722 by immigrants from Moravia, a region in what is now called the Czech Republic. He viewed them as a secret occult order. Some of the Moravians have been called neo-Masonic, and described in his diary the trances they would experience and how they would be semi-possessed by spirits. Swedenborg's last book, The Delights of Wisdom Pertaining to Conjugal Love, is where he gave some of his more or asexual teachings, including the notion that the highest form of love is conjugal love, physical sexual intercourse along with spiritual, mental union that leads to trance and a manifestation of God. Mesmer. The other person was Franz. His name is sometimes given as Friedrich Anton Mesmer, 1734–1815. My dictionary says that he sought to treat disease through animal magnetism, an early therapeutic application of hypnotism. But, as I've mentioned before, even so-called experts, including the dictionary, should not necessarily be trusted. In fact, the usual assumption that animal magnetism is simply a form of hypnosis is totally wrong. There are similarities in results, and even a superficial similarity of the methods, but the actual theories and techniques of animal magnetism, AM, are not those of hypnosis. The Secret Histo of Rye Sex Magic 21. AM and hypnosis both use a form of trance. With hypnosis, the trance is introduced through techniques including verbal and visual induction. That is, the hypnotist induces the state of hypnosis by leading the subject through a set of instructions or visual or other distractions which result in the trance state. The hypnotist can lead the subject through apparent past lives, implant suggestions into the subconscious mind of the subject which later manifest, or use other techniques to aid the person who has been hypnotized. Interestingly, one of hypnotism's earliest uses was to induce psychic abilities. Some of the reported results were unbelievably strong. For some reason, however, these experiments with hypnotically induced psychic abilities have been ignored for decades. With AM, however, energy is sent from either a mesmerist or a magnetized object to the patient. Mesmer's own description of his theories and techniques sound very close to methods of acupressure, acupuncture using finger pressure rather than needles, and therapeutic touch, a medically approved technique used by nurses that is similar to the laying on of hands. Although a mesmerist may have used two wands made of marl or glass, the healer might also use his or her hands to send energy to the patient. At the start of the treatment, the patient's body was stroked. Sometimes the treatment would result in sudden, profound changes in the patient. These changes, either obvious or subtle, are called the crisis. According to Mesmer, there is no healing without a crisis. Indeed, a crisis leads to healing. In some instances, disorders of the womb, Mesmer described the healing technique as including sending energy to the patient by touching the breasts, the ovaries, the round parts of the groin, and the palm of the hand is applied to the vulva. The mesmerist was usually a male, and some people in France, where Mesmer was located, were offended by the touching of sexual parts involved in some mesmeric healings. In 1784, 4 doctors requested that animal magnetism be investigated. By order of King Louis XIV, a commission investigated AM and declared it did not. 22 Motoresque magic exist. One of the commissioners was the guest from America, Benjamin Franklin. A copy of the report was recently published in Skeptic Magazine, Volume 4, Number 3. The investigators did not test Mesmer, but rather one of his students, named Deslon, and another person, named Jumelin, who had disagreements with Mesmer. Their tests were limited and, to my surprise, in some instances it was the commissioners who did the magnetizing. Some of their comments indicated a type of class struggle. They claimed that the lower classes were far more likely to experience the effects of animal magnetism than would the more intelligent upper classes. Not all of the commissioners attended all of the tests. In my opinion, the Commission came to the conclusion that AM was nothing more than suggestion on the basis of debatable research and predetermined opinions. Some of the commissioners were involved in traditional medicine, so I can understand why they would file a negative report about their competition. But why Franklin? He was no doctor and had no ulterior motive to sign the findings. Or did he? Did something in the idea of a trance induced through sexual stimulation bother him? By the time of the report, Franklin, 1706–1790, was 78 years old and had already had several wives, affairs and children, both legitimate and illegitimate. In France, even at his advanced age, he was known for having affairs with much younger women. In England he had been part of the Hellfire Club of Sir Francis Dashwood and, in all probability, participated in some of their orgiastic rites. At one time he wrote a letter to a young relative giving him advice in choosing a mistress, suggesting he get an older woman for a variety of reasons, including because she would be so grateful. Another of his infamous erusals is titled Fart Proudly, about which no more need be said. Franklin was no prude. If the sexuality in some mesmeric treatments, as well as the sexual overtones of mesmerism in general, was the cause for the report, why would he object? The Secret History of Sex Magic 23. In my opinion, part of the technique leading to the mesmeric trance was sexual arousal. This, in turn, led to a crisis, followed by healing. In other words, under the control of the mesmerist, the induced sexual arousal leads to trance, which leads to seemingly unrelated changes, but changes that are desired by both the patient and mesmerist, a change controlled by will. This is the very definition of magic. And the method to achieve that magic. Trance induced by sexual arousal. In short, a form of sex magic. These techniques, believed, were derived directly or indirectly from the Kabbalistic sexual trance techniques which, as described earlier, were probably known to some Freemasons. Now there is a reason for Franklin to deny the reality of AM. Of course he would object to the knowledge of sex magic being made available to the public. After all, he was a high-ranking Freemason and had certainly vowed to keep their secrets from outsiders. And where, exactly, did Swedenborg and Mesmer learn about what they taught? Perhaps they channeled it or developed it on their own. More likely, however, is that they developed it out of their own training. Serenely Swedenborg could have learned it from the Kabbalah he studied, but both of them could have gotten it from another source. After all, both of them were high-grade Freemasons. Blake. Also on the list of the teachers of sex magic comes the famous British poet William Blake, 1757–1827. One of Swedenborg's most famous books was Heaven and Hell. It rocked about marriage and sex with spirits. Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, c. 1790, shows its debt to Swedenborg by the title and the subject martyr. Blake was not only a strong follower of Swedenborg, but also a student of the Kabbalah. He was also interested in Druidism. Why Druidism? Blake, another Freemason, was probably familiar with the writings of fellow Mason John Cleland. Cleland wrote a book in 1764 called The Origin of Language and Nations. In this book he, 24 modern sex magic attempted to prove that Kabbalism and Druidry are the same. Then, in 1766, he published The Way to Things by Words. The Real Secret of the Freemasons, wherein he tried to show that Freemasonry actually began with the Druids. One of his proofs for this was his claim that the free in Freemasonry comes not from the notion of Masons being free from a feudal lord but from the name of the Northern European deity, Freya. Here we can see a direct link between the Kabbalah, Druidism, and Freemasonry. There is also a link to sexuality in Cleland's work. In 1750 he published his most famous work, The Joyous and Sexual Fanny Hill. In that book, the body Fanny, a prostitute, uses sex to achieve her goals. Perhaps this is a hint at the nature of sex magic. From Blake we move directly and indirectly to the previously mentioned Randolph and the OTO. Since others have discussed them in detail, there is no need to go over the material here. The Eastern influence. Although I want to keep this book focused on Western sex magic and not Eastern traditions, this is not totally possible. By the mid-1800s, the world was growing smaller. A man named Sir John Woodruff, using the pseudonym Arthur Avalon, published authentic books on Tantra, and Sir Richard Burton, 1821–1890, had translated the Kama Sutra. In various places around the world, groups were forming to experiment sexually. Already there had been the British Hellfire Club, which, as previously stated, had included as a member the Mason Benjamin Franklin. In Russia, Rasputin used his magnetic personality to heal or control the Tsarevich's hemophilia, which gave him control over the royal family. He was also the leader of a religious sect wherein he had many wives. Others went to the East and developed their own systems. Alice Bunker Stockham was the fifth woman to earn her doctorate in medicine in the USA. Her specialty was obstetrics and gynecology. After going to India, she published a book about a technique, The Secret History of Sex Magic 25. She had invented called carezza, pronounced caretzia, from the Italian word for caress. Carezza is based on the idea that men and women should have intercourse without orgasm. Meanwhile, John Humphrey Noyes developed the technique he called male continence, where the woman would have orgasms but the man would not. Noyes founded the Oneida community, still famous for its fine silverware, where his techniques were practiced. His adherents also engaged in what was called the complex marriage, where any man in the community might cohabit with any woman of the community. Many others experimented with a variety of techniques. The Shakers, who remain famous today for their solid furniture, believed in sexual abstinence. The result, of course, is that their numbers remained small due to lack of births. During religious services, they manifested the results of denying their sexuality in an explosion of energy that led to trance states, most known for the congregants writhing and shaking, hence their name. Sometimes they lost control and fell to the floor while in trance. Like others before them, they related this trance to spirituality rather than an expression of sublimated sexuality. The real cause is probably a mixture of the two. In 1893, William Butler Yeats claimed that Blake had been a member of a Rosicrucian school, i.e., the Golden Dawn, first founded in England by the previously mentioned Rabbi Falk. It must be remembered that Falk was considered to be a source of the Golden Dawn, and Yeats, one of the most famous English writers ever, was not only a member of the Golden Dawn, for a time he was one of its leaders. The Golden Dawn and sex magic. For those of you reading this who are not familiar with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, I refer you to the book 7 The Rites of Modern Occult Magic by King and the Magicians of the Golden Dawn by Howe. The order held its first ritual on the spring equinox of 1888 and went on to attract some of the most famous occultists and creative people of their day. The leaders were able to combine numerous spiritual and magical systems into a unique and coherent, albeit complex, whole. Virtually all modern occult systems in the West developed directly or indirectly from the Golden Dawn. The most famous and aide noir of the Golden Dawn was Aleister Crowley. In order to separate real magic from the performances of stage conjurers, Crowley added the letter K to the end of the word. Many people practicing magic today use star spelling in order to preserve the distinction. Another reason is given for adding the K. That letter is also the first letter of Hades, a word used in mystical Oriental books which means the female sexual organs. Thus, that added K also implies not just real magic, but sex magic. Many of Crowley's followers believed that his work and methods superseded the Golden Dawn. However, one feel he did not supersede the Golden Dawn so much as create a variant of it. For example, in the Book of the Law, the book he received and which he followed for most of his magical career, Crowley was told to abandon all of the old rituals. But rather than do so, he simply rewrote them to fit his Thelemic paradigm. They were not abandoned so much as modified. It is clear that some of Crowley's rituals were forms of sex magic. The question is, did he get his ideas for sex magic from the Golden Dawn? Is there clear evidence the Golden Dawn even had sex magic teachings? In the June 1993 issue, number 7, of Eidolon magazine, an excellent researcher, Dr. Richard Kaczynski, published an article that made the claim that, in fact, the Golden Dawn did have sex magic teachings. I wrote a letter to the magazine, which they published in the following issue, saying that until they came up with a smoking gun, a copy of a Golden Dawn sex magic rite, the claim was unproven. Now, I am not so sure. The Secret History of Sex Magic 7. Nobody can deny that people of all sorts of sexualities were members of the Golden Dawn. Moina Mathers was the sister of philosopher Henri Bergson, the wife of one of the Golden Dawn's founders, MacGregor Mathers, and the first initiate of the order. She wrote that she and her husband did not have sex. It has been suggested, however, that they were practicing some form of sexuality where they had intercourse but did not have orgasms. while in France, she and her husband opened a temple of Isis where they had public rituals. It has also been suggested that in private versions of the rituals, Moina and her husband practiced some form of spiritualized sex. Another Golden Dawn link to the world of sex magic comes through one of its important members, Dr. Edward Barrage. Barrage was a follower of Thomas Lake Harris, who was the founder of the Brotherhood of the New Life and leader of a communal group in the grape-growing region of Northern California. He was a follower of the ideas of noise and urged his followers to practice male continence. The commune was known as the Fountain Grove Community and was fairly well known. Allegedly, Harris and the other men would have sex with any willing women who visited the site. According to the reports I've seen, none of the women ever complained. Harris was also a minister in the Swedenborgian Church. Barrage published a pamphlet about Harris and his ideas and gave it to some select members of the Golden Dawn. This bothered one of the more restrained members, who complained to Mrs. Mathers. Moina responded that members in a much higher degree of the order would receive information on the subject, and Thar the complainer, not having the knowledge to make a logical comment on the subject, should just ignore the matter. Another hint is given in one of the side lectures known as the Flying Rolls. In this document, among other things, members are told to conquer jealousy. Since, in some cases, the practice of sex magic might involve working with a partner who is not a 28 mod say exr mag nick person's usual sexual partner, jealousy could become quite an issue. Further, if two people come together to perform sex magic, a bond may be created which one of the magicians might interpret as love. When their workings are over, the person feeling love might then start to feel jealousy as he or she sees the other magician with another lover. Why, then, would the Golden Dawn give the advice to overcome jealousy if there was not a possibility of it coming up in the future? I have a copy of a volume by one Edith Starr Miller, who wrote it under the nom de plume, Lady Queenborough. It is an occult book called Occult Theocracy. In it there are copies of documents which had been exchanged between Theodore Roos, head of the OTO before Crowley, and W. Westcott, one of the heads of the Golden Dawn. They are dated 1902. In them, Roos is given various honors in a Masonic group, and Westquarter says that he will write an article for Rias's magazine, The Oriflamme. It was in that magazine, years before, where it had been announced that the OTO had the secret of sex magic. It has been common, at least in the past, for leaders of occult orders to recognize each other and share information. It is highly likely that Roos shared the secrets of sex magic with Westcourt, if Westcott didn't know them already. It might be argued that Westcotter, the coroner of London, had resigned from his co-headship of the Golden Dawn in 1897, when it became publicly known that he was one of the leaders of an occult order, 5 years before the above documents were traded. However, he may have had an important hand behind the scenes, and it is believed that he stayed a member. Another member of the Golden Dawn, Dion Fortune, also seems to have been familiar with sex magic. In fact, she wrote about it in some very subtle, and one not so subtle, ways. She started a magical order as a sort of introductory group for the Golden Dawn. This evolved into her own group, the Society of the Inner Light. She equated the inner light, the spiritual divine. The Secret History of Sex Magic 29. Lies with a higher manifestation of Freud's idea of the libido, a sexual energy. In the esoteric philosophy of love and marriage, she claims that occultists equate sex with the life force, of radiating and magnetizing vibratory activity, capable of compression and of exercising pressure. In other words, the energy raised during sexual activity can be collected, compressed, and used to exert pressure. She also discusses the idea that when you have sexual arousal, you should acknowledge it and dedicate it to a god form. This is similar to a variety of sex magic and tantric techniques. Some sources have also claimed that she consulted with Crowley about sex magic. And certainly some of her novels, such as The Sea Priestess, are filled with the idea of sexual magic. So is there any way to show that she got some of her information from the Golden Dawn? Again, there is not a direct link, but there does seem to be an indirect one. Moina Mathers expelled Fortune from the Golden Dawn for revealing some of the order's inner secrets in the esoteric philosophy of love and marriage. Have been through that book several times. There is almost nothing that could be considered an inner secret. Most of it, in my opinion, is bland claptrap. Almost. I am most grateful to a friend of mine in San Diego, Mr. Donald Lockwood, who pointed out some of the following information. In the book she writes, When the act of sexual union takes place, the subtle forces of the two natures rush together, and, as in the case of two currents of water in collision, a whirlpool or vortex is set up. This vortex extends up the planes. It is by means of the vortex of ingress that souls are enabled to pass down the planes and make contact with a molecule